Okay, we are live. Hi, this is William Ramsey. Welcome to William Ramsey Investigates. On today's show, I have a very special guest, a returning guest. We've done two shows in the past. His name is Joe Szmihart. Last name is spelled Szimhart. And you can go, I'll put a link to his YouTube channel. He's done a lot of research online on a variety of different subjects. And the theme of his channel is cults in the occulture. And he has a cult kind of deprogramming history. But I talked to him about his very interesting book, and I highly recommend people check this out. And that book's title was, I'm going back to it. We also did a show about Lewis, Julian West, but he also did this book about his kind of it's Santa Fe, Bill Tate, and Me. How a come on, where's my
how an artist became a cult interventionist.
Cult interventionist, thank you. So you're really not a deprogrammer, you're an interventionist.
Well, it's a better term for that.
Okay. Well, you probably, interventionist is a better term. But I was looking through his research on his YouTube channel, and I came across this A Course in Miracles, and something that I remember in my life. Like, I know friends who've read the Course in Miracles. It's popped up in other conversations I've had with people, and there was some kind of vague MK Ultra association with somebody who was affiliated with the writer of this Helen Schuckman. The guy's name was William Thetford, but Joe can talk more about that. So Joe, welcome back to the show.
Yeah, thank you for having me on, Bill.
Awesome. So for people who may not have heard our earlier two conversations, can you kind of talk about your background, your interest, and then you said you on the pre-show you have studied A Course in Miracles since back in the 70s, and so I'm glad you came on to discuss.
Yeah, I was living in Santa Fe, New Mexico at the time, and Santa Fe is a hotbed for New Age experimental spirituality and that kind of thing. It's a big art center, so it stands to reason artists tend to be very experimental and in all kinds of phases of life, and so Santa Fe is a good fit for this kind of thing happening there. The Course in Miracles was released in 1976 as a finished product. And a lady I knew, came up to me around 1977, 78 with it and said, have you seen this? Because she knew I was a critic of the channeling phenomenon. And A Course in Miracles is essentially a channeled document. This woman, Helen Schuckman, back around 1965, was having disturbing thoughts, and she was part of the psychological teams for a Columbia hospital with Bill Thetford, her boss. And they were having an enormous amount of problems with their staff there, and she was his assistant. And without giving too much background on her, she had a long history of religious experimentation, and her father had a esoteric bookstore. And anyway, she had visions about Jesus and a lot of things. And so this one auditory hallucination began that kept bothering her, and she called it the voice. And it kept telling her to take down this dictation. You've got to write. And she kept resisting. And so she told Bill Thetford, her boss, about this apparently autonomous voice in her head that was telling her to write. And he said, let's go with it. Let's see what comes out of it. And so he encouraged her. And for 7 years, she took down notes, random notes from this voice, and it would happen every night. And it wouldn't allow her to stop writing until it was ready. And it after 7.5 years, it said it's complete. And then they had this big manuscript, this pile of stuff in their desk at the hospital where they worked, because they would do this every morning, go through the thing, discuss what the voice told her, and then file it. So this system of channeling is not unusual. It's been going on for thousands of years. You could argue that Muhammad, who was inspired by an angel, Jibril, was channeling information from some metaphysical source and came out with the Quran. Whether it's true or not, or how holy it is, that's a whole other debate. But basically, he fits into the channeling thing. Joseph Smith, who used these two scribing stones called Uman and Thuman, was looking inside of a hat and he claimed he could hear or see the words to the Book of Mormon, and he channeled and wrote out over a long period of time the Book of Mormon. So you could say he crafted it or he channeled it, however you want to say that. And so those are two examples, the Quran and the Book of Mormon. And then there's some examples in the Bible of prophecy being channeled, for instance. But Helen's book claimed that the voice was Jesus, a very modern Jesus for our time. And the reason the Course in Miracles comes out, and this is what it states, is that we are in dire times. And now you're talking about the 60s, right? And that the mankind needs this message in order to be saved. So the salvation, according to the Course, is basically a form of knowledge, or Gnosticism. And the miracle is that we are always saved. There is no time when we are not saved. The only thing that keeps us from being saved or one with God or whatever is our thoughts, our monkey mind, our inability to accept it. And so we constantly attack this rather pure connection we have as God, being God, or with God, or whatever way you want to look at it. And the Course is a document to help us to break through that barrier of the self and the higher self, or our human self and the God self, or however you want to put it. The perfection of Jesus in our mind as opposed to our human imperfection. And it has lessons for 365 days, so it takes a year to get through it. It's a manual for teachers, so there's a lot of study groups around the Course in Miracles that have sprung up. In Santa Fe, New Mexico, a church even opened up. Hugh Prather, the poet, who was famous, sold a lot of copies of his self-published or published book called Notes to Myself. And they were like poetic statements. The whole thing was based on his meditations on A Course in Miracles.
Wow.
So Hugh Prather lived in Santa Fe at the time. He was kind of a prissy kind of a guy in my estimation. But in any case, I think he was married. I'm not sure at the time. He decided to start a church called the Dispensable Church, meaning that at any time in the future, it could be dispensed with. It wasn't necessary. But it was established, and it had a congregation, and people would come much like they go to any church. They sat in kind of pews, and there was an altar area or a podium where people would preach. They would read from A Course in Miracles. They would do a homily or talk about something, and they would do kind of a meditation or a silent communion with the voice, Jesus, God, the inner self, whatever you want to call it, as their ritual. And they did some singing. They would play some music like Pachelbel's canon and that kind of spiritual stuff, to make the thing. They even conducted marriages, I think the church lasted for just a few years, and then it folded up. But 50 people, 60 people, 100 people would come to the services. It was significant. So that kind of thing opened up in dozens of ways around the Course in Miracles over the years. And most famously lately, since Marianne Williamson has been running for president, she has been an advocate of A Course in Miracles now for decades. And some of her books are based on it, and she, taught the Course, and she advocates its ideology as being good for the nation, for the world, or whatever. And so if you hear her saying some really flaky things during her political campaigns, you can attribute it to what she gets out of the Course to some extent, which are kind of mystical and abstruse and spiritual and holistic and all that kind of thing. So just to finish the introduction to this, it's sold about 2 million copies. It's been translated into 16 languages. So there's certainly books that have sold a lot better than this, but it's significant in terms of its impact. The last thing I'll say about this, the churches, or the types of organizations that picked up on A Course in Miracles in the late 70s when it came out, were the New Thought churches. Immediately, like Unity Church especially promoted A Course in Miracles. And the reason for that is when you analyze A Course in Miracles, which I've written a couple of papers on it, it is a reflection of New Thought ideology, which started in the 19th century. It very much fits into that. And so the New Thought churches are like Unity Church, the Church of Science of the Mind, the Church of Religious Science, the Church of Divine Science, Christian Science. To some extent, Scientology derives from New Thought. And the idea behind New Thought is this. It started out as kind of quasi-Christian under a guy named Phineas Quimby. And he was trying to discover a way to do therapy to heal people through talking. And he decided that he had to, if he could convince people to take on the mind of Christ, to feel perfection, in other words, the ultimate positive thinking, like you can think your pain away, you can think your poverty away, you can think your bad relationship away, you can, as long as you substitute very positive thoughts and don't have any doubts that this is going to come true, then Jesus or God or the universe or whatever the hell you want to call it can work through you, and voila, you're going to have perfection in your life, or at least an instance of it. So that's basically New Thought. So the New Thought practitioner is someone who sits there with you and tries to get you to think these positive thoughts, or talks you past your doubts and pain, and you allow your mind, body to heal through this. Phineas Quimby called it Christian Science. At one point, one of his top disciples who came to him for a healing was Mary Baker Eddy. When she was Mary Baker, she felt healing from a session with him. Her back pain and whatever went away. You know, it comes through what we would call auto-suggestion. You can do this through hypnosis. You can heal pain through some people that are highly suggestible, and pain will minimize or go away. So through this process of New Thought or auto-suggestion or suggestion therapy, she felt healed. She started studying Phineas Quimby stuff, and then she came out with her Science of Health or whatever book, and started Christian Science. She turned what he had into a church. He never wanted to start a church. You know, he was just kind of a healer that stimulated all these dozens of organizations that used his teachings later. So, yeah, so basically it's a reflection of the New Thought idea. And it's you know, for instance, all of this movement of affirmations comes out of New Thought. You know, there was a famous affirmation back in the early 1900s it was a guy named Coué from France that repeated it in French originally, and it was in every day and in every way I'm getting better, better, and better. And millions of people started repeating this mantra in Europe and in Eastern United States especially, in order to make themselves feel better. You know, so the affirmation or decreeing thing, to decree something, to speak something into existence. A lot of Christians bought into this, and it was called the positive thinking or speaking into existence crowd of the Christian churches. There's a lot of those churches around that are influenced by New Thought, and you wouldn't know it, you know, unless you knew the background behind these things.
Right.
So anyway, so go ahead, ask me some questions here.
Well, I was just going to say, it is remarkable. It like spawned, this one book has spawned a whole industry, individuals, like you said. It's disseminated all the way around, and it purports to be from kind of Christ in heaven, but it's kind of quasi-Christian, even though it does, I mean, I was reading through it, it does quote from the Bible, but not like a standard Christian text. It only has it in the footnotes as references, like she's so it's not focused on the Gospels, but it claims to be. So it's definitely quasi-Christian. Yeah.
Well, think about this. If you look at Jesus' teachings in the Gospel, I mean, there's this idea that your faith has cured you. You know, this is a big thing with the Jesus teachings, right? And so it wasn't about him sprinkling fairy dust on you in order to heal you. It was about him stimulating your faith in him as God to heal you, right? And if you didn't have faith, you wouldn't get healed. That was basically the formula. So this takes it another step into metaphysical space, so to speak, where it's not just faith in the gospel and the healing and salvation message of Jesus. It's almost getting rid of that gospel message and bringing God more in an immediate relationship with you by saying this, that there is no separation between you and God. You, in fact, are God. And you could also say that about a rock. if you really want to. When you look at this philosophy, if you think of God as an emanating being, as emanating the creation, then everything that's out there is God. Even if it's right or wrong, evil or not, everything is God. Even if it's inert, like a rock, which isn't really inert. I mean, there's a lot of atomic activity going on in that rock. It just seems inert to us. But the Course in Miracles pretends to help you to become much more energized and closer to that realization, or what Eastern teachings would call self-realization, that you are Atman, one with Brahman. There's a correlation here between some Eastern teachings and Course in Miracles, in a way.
Right, and it's one of the chapter headings from the original text when they compile it was of the illusion of separation, right? So
exactly, yeah. It's an illusion, and that the Course calls an attack. This illusion, this Maya that we live in, is attacking our awareness that we are perfect in God.
Right, but it has kind of Christian language, but the dictates like humans, and then the angels, and then there's a God, a Father, or something, and Christ is. Yeah. It doesn't have that worldview, right?
No, it doesn't. And I'll tell you the big difference is the classic Christian, the traditional Christian, if you will. The mainstream Catholic, the mainstream evangelical, the mainstream Anglican. They view Jesus as the mediator between God and man. That Jesus is the substitute. Jesus, was sacrificed on the cross in a way, a kind of deicide, God dying on the cross, telling us that this is all taken care of. We are saved. We just have to believe this. We have to accept it. We didn't do it. The creation didn't do it. It's God through this creation, Jesus, did it. Now, I understand this language gets kind of confusing because you can kind of flip it and say, well, the Course in Miracles is saying almost the same thing, except it's different language. All right, so that brings me to this. This is the problem I have with the Course and with some of the Gospels as well. Wittgenstein was famous as saying, here, let me get it. He said this. He says, philosophy is a battle against the bewitchment of our intelligence by means of our language. All right, so what happens is we get caught up in a lot of our own insights and language, and then it becomes set like a gospel or a testament, and we can't change it, and we get bewitched by it. So then we try to force everything into it, like as if this is a perfect document, of course, in Miracles, or let's say a gospel, and then we try to force reality into this container, and we end up with a really clumsy, sometimes messy, very confusing product, because obviously if we look at A Course in Miracles, it's a highly flawed document. The language is really difficult because it was channeled. It wasn't really reasoned out, and most channeling is difficult because it's abstruse and it's kind of poor poetry. Let me put it that way. Very poor poetry. Unlike Shakespeare, his poetry was brilliant. Or Robert Frost, his poetry is brilliant. You can say he's channeling from his muse, but there's some kind of beauty and substance there, where A Course in Miracles is really clunky. So if you have something from a perfect God, you would expect something more elegant, something more useful. And it's very difficult to put A Course in Miracles into use without having a lot of people interpret it for you, helping you discuss it. You could say the same things about the teachings of Jesus. Some of them are really difficult. And they almost contradict each other in some places. Don't cause any violence, and yet in another gospel says take up the sword when you go out. So you have to be really careful with these kind of documents, and not allow them to bewitch you, which happens very often when people get into this. They think it's from God, therefore I have to shoehorn my mind into this thing and make it work, when this thing is unworkable, basically. When you deconstruct it, which I've done for a lot of people. I've exit counseled dozens of people out of Course in Miracles cults by just looking at, say, 10 things in A Course in Miracles, helping them to deconstruct it and showing them that, listen, this thing is not only illogical, it's asking too much of you. You know, it's like asking a cripple to compete in the Olympics at the level of a football player, you know, and but the problem here is that there's no Olympics going on. There's no one that can explain A Course in Miracles better than anyone else.
Well, it's super long. It's 1,000 pages long.
I know it is
it's
3 segments to it, you know, so
okay.
it's not all one book. It's 3 books
But
jammed together.
I mean,
into
you could
this.
do have a lifetime, and people do dedicate their life to this. And
Oh, I've
also,
known people that have been reading this for 30 years, trying to make it work. It's their religion. Oprah Winfrey, on one of her shows in the late 80s, held up A Course in Miracles, says, "This is my Bible."
wow, I didn't know that.
You know, and
That's incredible.
she brought Mary Ann Williamson on back around 1992, and Mary Ann Williamson said, "This is my Bible," but because she had some political clout at the time, A Course in Miracles had a big bump in sales after that Oprah show.
Wow, yeah. So she's probably a multi-millionaire.
She's made a living off A Course in Miracles.
Right.
Now, A Course in Miracles is run by a foundation, the Foundation for Inner Peace. So they kind of control it as far as its integrity. In other words, maintaining it as, they'll argue, for instance, if somebody's misusing it or trying to publish it on their own or whatever, because they have the publishing rights. But as far as them being able to define what it means, there's very little they can do about that, because anybody can use it, much like the Bible, and do anything you want with it.
Right. So you could have possibly positive aims, but also nefarious ones, right? Like,
yeah, sure. You know, it depends on who's interpreting it.
right.
There's a lot of cults the destructive cults that have used Course in Miracles, like the Full Endeavor Academy up in Wisconsin, and then there was another thing called the Bridge in Colorado that fell apart. I mean, I exit counseled a number of people out of that cult, and its main document was A Course in Miracles. You could say they were misusing it in order to control people, which they were, but you can say that about the Bible or the Quran or any document.
True. So true.
Yeah.
I mean, they can all go wrong, but the Course of Miracles is interesting because it does have like a lesson plan, doesn't it? Isn't there?
Yeah,
like
that's one of its main things, is that the 365 lessons, one for every day. There's
right,
a workbook, and then there's a text, the course itself, the text.
Right. So it's almost like you're self-actualizing it. So maybe in a Christian context or Jewish or something, you read the scripture, you talk about it, but it's not like you're going down this pathway. So somebody could really get enraptured or bewitched by this by doing it day after day after day after day.
And they do, in that sense. They become entranced by it. It becomes a focus for them. Now, to be clear here, most of the people I've met, and I've met hundreds that study A Course in Miracles, are good citizens. They're not bad people. They have productive lives. You know, they might even be very well educated. They just find it to be a useful way to meditate on something during the day, and they kind of believe in its message that if they keep working it, they'll become closer to God in their daily affairs and that sort of thing. So not everybody that studies it becomes an extremist. You know, they might even put it away for 3-4 months and then pick it up again. So it isn't like some kind of a cult movement. You know, it's a cult object, much like the Bible is. You know, there's a lot of devotion to it, and it's very extraordinary, and it's for special people, you know, that are enlightened enough to understand it, and that kind of thing. So in that sense, you could say it's a cult object. It's a book cult, but it's not a social cult in this, or a commune cult, that kind of a thing. There is no organization that controls people. You know, like, let's say the Catholic Church, for instance, has a thing called a catechism, which defines what every Catholic should believe. There is no real central document that tells you how you should use A Course in Miracles. It tells you itself how to do that. You know, and there's no, like I said, the Foundation for Inner Peace doesn't manage people's lives when they start buying the course.
Right. But I mean, these books, I think they were expensive. Like my friend bought them. I don't think they're cheap. They're very well wrought, you know, hardcover books, at least the ones.
Yeah. You can get an expensive version, but it also comes in a paperback.
Oh, is that right? Okay.
Yeah. So
Interesting.
you can find, and you can probably find a lot of them as used books, because
That's true.
people will try to read this thing, and even 2 million have sold. Probably it's a tens of thousands of people are really hardcore into it at any one time. I wouldn't think of the movement is much bigger than that.
But you say it's the New Thought movement. You see all those ideas in there, like capitalized mind and all these other kind of things like going on that Christian Science has. But it's also, I think, firmly ensconced in the New Age movement too, right? So it's not
Well,
just
New Thought and New Age are almost are entirely
okay,
compatible.
okay,
What we call New Thought and what we call Theosophy, the Theosophical Society, are the two godmothers, or the two main funnels of inspiration for the New Age movement. The third one being Christianity. The idea that the world is going through a great change, a new age is coming, and we have to prepare ourselves. And we have to prepare ourselves according to some kind of an inspiration or document or guru, or using ayahuasca, or whatever it is we do to go into the new consciousness. So we have waves of New Age movement ideology happening since the 19th century.
right.
Like for instance, the Jehovah Witnesses and the Seventh Day Adventists have been predicting a new age coming for a long time. The
Right.
Masons, the Freemasons, came out with a magazine called The New Age back in 1909 or 1910. And
Oh, wow.
it was kept going until recently, and it had that same theme that that the Freemasons were part of this inspired group of people that were going to bring about the new age of the world. And in some sense, the founding of the United States was kind of a new age of politics for the world.
Yeah,
It was
like a new
inspired quite a
Atlantis or
bit
something.
by the Enlightenment people, and by the Freemasons were really into that. There were quite a few of those people that were uh, highly progressive intellectually, that formed our Constitution.
Right. No, it's really incredible. I did a show on the externalization of the hierarchy, and that was all it. Like we were going for this new era, new age,
Yeah,
this
that was
whole
Alice
thing.
Bailey, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
she's one of the maybe 10 most influential people since the 20s and 30s of what we call the New Age movement. Alice Bailey writings.
And I think she was channeled too. I think she had some kind of divine master who was talking to her.
Right. She was interesting. She grew up in an Anglican family, married an Anglican minister young, and went to India with him. He was abusive. They had two kids, I think, two daughters, and in fact, he threw her down the steps once. And finally, her bishop allowed her to separate from him because he just had this anger problem. And she was very discouraged and ended up migrating to California, the coast, and was working in a cannery, fish cannery, trying to support herself. And down there was a theosophical center near Point Loma, and she got involved with the Theosophists and quickly began to absorb it and became a teacher of Theosophy, Madame Blavatsky's Theosophy. Madame Blavatsky introduced her Theosophy, claiming she was channeling information from five masters. There was the Old Man of the Hills, Saint Germain, Jua Kul, Kuthumi, and Moria. Jua Kul is the one that intrigued Alice Bailey in the late teens, 1918, 1919, and she started hearing the voice of Jua Kul that called himself the Tibetan. So the Tibetan was like her voice, like Helen Schucman's voice, and she channeled messages from the Tibetan, which is like the externalization of the hierarchy. And there's 20 books, 21 books in the series, and she channeled those books from 1921, I think, until 1949, until she died. And that's the body of her work, and that was her voice in her head. And and there's the unfinished autobiography of her life, which she wrote. She says that when the voice that she had from Dua Kul, or the Tibetan, was ready, she could feel this little click in her brain, that it would click in, and then she would just allow it to flow and just write as if she's automatic writing. What's interesting, her form of writing matched her education. It was British English,
Interesting. Right.
and where Helen Schucman's form of channeling from the God source or whatever matched her education and her background, which is kind of Americanized psychological English, because she was a psychologist, and you pick up that kind of flavor of healing the mind through A Course in Miracles, which is what psychologists do. They try to help you heal the mind. Right. So most channelers, when they channel God, they channel the God of their own culture. And you can see cultural elements in their particular channeling form. And so Alice Bailey's was theosophy and her British background.
Right. So really interesting. Have you ever noticed the language similarities between Alice Bailey's externalization of the hierarchy and QAnon? It's really astonishing.
There's quite a bit of similarity there. In fact, what's interesting is some of QAnon was inspired also by my old cult, the Church Universal and Triumphant, which what's his name, General Flynn.
Flynn, yeah.
Right. He actually led a prayer, and I have it videotaped. You can find it online, where he's repeating almost verbatim a prayer by Elizabeth Clare Prophet from the late 80s or 90s about sending Archangel Michael and his legions of angels out to do the bidding of God and, impose the will of God on the planet, and, like an army fighting Satan out there. And he had the whole audience chanting this thing. They had no idea they were chanting some a cult group that most Christians wouldn't think was Christian. But Flynn's family apparently is into this stuff.
Oh, really? So, I didn't know it was his whole family.
Wow. I don't know if it's his whole family, but some people are. I don't know if it's his mother or somebody. But and I don't know how much they're into it, because, the Church Universal and Triumphant has a lot of branches, like spin-off sects and cults that came off its teachings. This leader, Elizabeth Prophet, developed Alzheimer's, and she passed away about 10 years ago or more.
Well, people can hear that. I'll put a link to our first discussion about your book, Santa Fe, Bill Tate and Me, How an Artist Became a Cult Interventionist, because you talk about that in depth, and it's timely. It couldn't be more important, because the stuff is still out there in the common culture. And just like A Course in Miracles, have you ever heard a critique of A Course in Miracles as kind of self-hypnosis or self-hypnotic kind of that's what you do?
It is, because New Thought itself is self-hypnotic. It's auto-suggestion. You're telling yourself you have no disease. You're telling yourself you have no pain. You're telling yourself you're not poor. You're telling yourself you're rich. The whole Trump family was into New Thought. Norman Vincent Peale was a minister to the Trump family. Wow. I think he even conducted Trump's first wedding, and so when you hear Trump never admit to doing anything wrong, he is like an extreme New Thoughtist. Because if you admit to sin, if you admit to failure, if you admit to poverty, you are letting it into your life. If you admit to crime, you are letting it into your life. So Trump's thing is to attack everybody that attacks him, because he's perfect. He's a genius. He never does anything wrong. All he's doing, he's just a brainwashed New Thought advocate. That's all he is. He's like a puppet to New Thought when you hear him talk. I mean, I just find it ridiculous, but there's millions, tens of millions of Americans that think this way. And that's why they like him. They like the fact that you can deny reality and get away with it, because most Americans can't get away with it. If they stand in front of a judge and say, I'm perfect, I'm smart, I didn't do anything wrong, it's you think I did something wrong, it's your problem. And he just, because he's wealthy, he gets lawyers to find loopholes for him all the time. The average American can't do that. They talk like that in front of a judge, they're going to get thrown in jail, or in a mental institution, one or the other.
But that New Thought explains that kind of odd personality of, like, anything you say is water off of my brain or something. Like, it's not, right. He just always comes back with, I'm the greatest. It's almost like New Thought explains it perfectly. It's like beyond narcissism.
It's a disease. Mark Twain wrote about it back in over 100 years ago, thinking this was going to destroy America. And he was criticizing Christian Science, but he was criticizing New Thought. He could see, he was almost prophetic, how this can become an infection in the American spirit. And it has. It's come to roost. We have a president that was based on this crap.
Wow, it's amazing. It
Yeah.
makes perfect sense. Like how curious his personality is. It's like,
You can put it right back in there. He's almost an extreme version of it. You
yeah,
know,
like an extreme new thoughtist. Wow. He's like I'm making my will into the world reality. I'm changing it with my brain.
you know, even Charles Manson was into this New Thought stuff, but he came onto it via Scientology and other stuff. When he was on trial for murder, he said, "I didn't kill anybody. I didn't do anything wrong." That's in your mind. You think that you're projecting on that. So, in other words, in his mind, he's a perfect little guy. You know, he's okay. And it's other people that project on him that says he's a murderer. That's the only reason he's in jail. You know, and so he would use the same tactics that Trump uses, but because of who he was, and he got caught, you know, red-handed, being this crazy hippie with this crazy hippie family, he paid the consequences to a great extent. But he never gave up on that idea that, you know, this isn't his problem. This is everybody else's problem. You know.
Interesting. Yeah, he was clear. Like I think Manson was a very advanced Scientologist. A lot of people overlook that
Well, to
fact.
some extent, you know, he never paid for the courses. You know, he wasn't that into it as far as becoming a Scientologist, but he read the stuff, the Dianetics and whatever, and absorbed it, you know, and like any good malignant narcissist, he used what he wanted out of it.
See, I had heard, I think it was from the Helter Skelter, was that he walked into a Scientology center and there was nothing they could train him. So I guess that was it. Maybe
That's
that was
probably
the
it,
same
yeah.
as really clear, but it
Yeah,
is interesting.
yeah. Go ahead.
I just was going to say, like a lot of this new thought ideas and new age people, maybe it's just me, maybe other people or you or are more aware of it, but I'm not really as aware now. I'm much more aware of this kind of Alice Bailey, Elizabeth Clare Prophet, and the ideas and how there really are something happening right now. They're really affecting the larger culture. There's no question about it.
It's affected our politics, and it's partly why we're so divided. There's this inability for quite a few people on the right and left to get out of this idea that my basic assumptions are reality. You know, and if you get caught in a basic assumption, you're essentially trapped in a kind of a dependency cycle on your basic assumption. You're not willing to change your mind. In other words, you're not willing to work the problem and see if you can come up with a better solution to how you think. You know, you emotionally tied to this basic assumption state that you're in. And you know, our entire nation is based on this idea that you come up with a working group, that despite the differences, you work it out and you compromise, you come up with the best ideas, and you pick one or two and try to run with it until they don't work anymore, and then you change. That's the constitutional way. That was what the original founders set it up to be, but that's broken down now because we have too many people locked into basic assumptions about reality, you know. And so in other words, my thoughts are my reality, and my thoughts are God's reality, you know, and I'm not going to change them. You know, so you have people locking down, and, you know, and what's interesting, Fox News people that developed Fox News knew this zeitgeist was out there, and they saw they could make a buck off of this. And I think it was completely cynical what Fox News did. It took advantage of a weakness in American thinking and said, "You guys are right, you guys are correct, and we're going to keep feeding you this." And you know, not that they do it all the time, because some of their news is accurate and useful. You know, they're not complete dunces when it comes to reality, but or else, you know, they'd have a real problem on their hands.
But these corporate heads know this stuff,
but they
and I
know
think they
this.
use
They
it both on the
cynically
left and right. So
they
they have
frame the
Trump.
news.
Yeah, they frame it.
Yeah.
But that's what Trump was really useful to the people on the left. He was their best money maker of all time. They would just play Trump acting like a new thought buffoon out there, and then they would lock all the left into a way of thinking, and then the right's locked in. And
well, you know, a lot of what we call new thought is really the left. When you think about positive thinking and channeling and you know, even the yoga crowd, to kind of purify your thoughts and whatever, they can fall into that quite easily. In fact, you know, with QAnon, if you look at it, there wasn't just right-wing crazies that were into QAnon. it was also called pastel QAnon. A lot of the left wing, the yoga school people, the moms into PTA and all that progressive stuff also fell into QAnon in a way. A good percentage of QAnon was part of that crowd, and it's because they basically, people have these they want to believe that in their gut they know reality, and they don't want to work too hard to get it. So
it's not evolving, and you can interview those QAnon people. They are true believers. It's a great psyop. Like one of the most.
Oh, it's incredible. Yeah, it's worked pretty well, but I don't think it's so much a psyop as a movement that's taken advantage of something that's already there, because most people I meet tend to think they're psychic, or at least something psychic is real, when there's never been any evidence for it, none. But if you start telling someone, like when I worked in a hospital for 25 years, most of the staff, the nurses, even educated doctors in some cases, believed in the full moon effect. Policemen did. When I talked to them, they go, "Oh, it must be a full moon." And the full moon effect on psych hospitals and activity in a hospital is bogus. There isn't any.
But you would have seen it over a quarter century. Yeah, you would have seen it.
Yeah. So, I even showed a study at our hospital, which I did. I ran a thing on admission activity, which would indicate higher activity, full moon energy, which is what they claim. And the day before, the day of, and the day after a full moon, I ran that over a 3-year period. And when you look at the whole spread, there's absolutely no statistical difference between any other phase of the moon and the full moon in terms of admission activity to that psych hospital. None. We weren't any more busy overall during a full moon period than we were on any other day on average. So, that's just one small sample, but there's dozens of good research done on this. So, yeah, the full moon affects the tides. It has, animals can see better at night, so they got to be more careful because predators can spot them. It affects reality in some way, absolutely. But as far as changing the psychology of a human being, it's not what the astrologer says it is, and it's certainly not what people that work in emergency rooms say it is. Yeah.
Right. It's interesting, like the human propensity or tendency to believe in all those things goes back all the way back in time, like astrology and psychological. Noetic Institute is studying all that stuff now.
Oh yeah, it's important for us as human beings to maintain some control over this mysterious reality we have. So we invent religions, we invent totems, we invent organizing principles that keep the tribe together. We have sacred trees. We do rituals before it. The tree talks to somebody, and there's a shaman in the tribe, and the tribe interprets that, and sometimes the information is quite good. And if it isn't good, if the shaman misleads us, we kill the shaman. Right. That was true even in the 19th century among Navajos. In other words, if you were a seer or a sorcerer in the Navajo tradition, and you lied, you came up with false information, your life was at stake. You better, if you're going to be a sorcerer, if you're going to be a seer, if you're going to be a prophet, you better be telling the truth, because we're relying on you. Our very lives, our decisions rely on you. Our crops rely on you. So
that's interesting. I think that's even in the Old Testament, Joe. I think
in the Old Testament, you stone false prophets because a false prophet could destroy the tribe.
The whole tribe.
So if you're going to be a prophet, you better have your wits about you and reality test what the hell you're going to say before you start talking. Otherwise you might get buried in stones. Right. That doesn't happen today. The channeling phenomenon, like with A Course in Miracles, is an open territory. It's like, it's like fine art. I say, it's Marshall McLuhan said, art is anything you can get away with in the late 60s. Talking about modern art, same thing. Religion is anything you can get away with these days. There's no real guideposts out there for this, unless it goes really bad, like some guru comes up with a secret potion that's going to heal you, and suddenly half of his congregation dies. Well, the government's going to get involved real quick and wonder what's going on here. What are you feeding these people? You just killed 50 people, and you're going to get prosecuted. So until something like that happens, it's mostly just a free-for-all when it comes to spirituality and religion.
It really is. And I think it's interesting, like you mentioned Muhammad, Joseph Smith, we've talked about Bailey, and then Shukman. These channel, there's so many channel books. Like there were there's so many different chronicles and channel. If you go to a New Age bookstore, you
Oh
probably know
yeah.
more than me, but I can't
No,
remember.
no, there's tens of thousands of
Yeah.
them at least. Back in 1987, a TV show I worked with that was looking at channeling. It was called West 57th Street, and they were looking at Penny Torres Mafu, who was a channeler that was a knockoff of Ramtha, the channeler. And Mafu became quite popular and wealthy, or Penny Torres, who channeled this quasi spiritual being. They did a study in Los Angeles, a survey, and they found out in Los Angeles alone, there were 1,700 people channeling gods and angels and stuff. That's in that one 1987 survey.
Wow.
So you expand that, to Europe and Australia and Canada and everywhere else. I mean, you count and see what you come up with. You're looking at hundreds of thousands of channelers out there right now.
Right. A good point.
And,
So
and that
really,
to me is a conservative amount.
I think you're right. But California always attracted people on the New Age or the fringe. It was always kind of like the frontier.
It got more. I think it got more publicity, but they were in Texas, they were in Arizona, they were in New York City, they were in Wisconsin. I found them everywhere. Florida.
Yeah, there's always like some Atlantean or something. It's almost kind of close to UFO tradition in some odd
Very
way.
much so. Yeah, it kind of, after the Roswell incident, you began to see people channeling space brothers, UFO beings. One of the most famous was called Sananda. Was a space brother up there floating around in some ship and coming to save the world. Sananda was a stand-in name for Jesus Christ. So Jesus said, become, in that particular, called a space brother.
Oh, interesting. I've never heard that. So was he a Maitreya? Sananda Maitreya? There's a website about him, right?
Yeah, that Maitreya has been abused and used by dozens of cults. It's the Maitreya tradition comes out of Buddhism, and in Mahayana Buddhism, it claims that in the future, which is tens of thousands of years into the future, the coming Buddha would be Maitreya, like a Messiah type figure. But that's far, far in the future. But leave it to the New Agers; they want to have it now. And so you have Maitreyas appearing all over the place right now.
Right, there was that guy Benjamin.
Dozens of Maitreya cults out there. There's not just one.
Wow, yeah, you have an amazing survey of all these dudes.
Well, if you look back in the 1980s, Benjamin Creme, who passed away, he was a follower of Alice Bailey, and he began to channel messages from this Maitreya being that he claimed was going to appear in 1982, was going to come in an airplane and appear to the planet Earth and become our Messiah, our Savior. He started a cult or a foundation in England, and Creme took out full-page ads in the New York Times, the Tokyo Times, the Los Angeles Times, and one other place. I mean, full-page ads in these newspapers saying that Christ is now here. Look it up, 1982. The Christ is now here, advertising Maitreya, and this whole thing,
like $250,000 on that campaign, like a huge amount of money.
He went lecturing all over the place about this, and I saw him twice lecturing. In fact, I questioned him about it in 1982, before the appearance of the Christ was supposed to happen, and which was in the spring. Well, the spring came and went, and there was no Maitreya, and so he then backtracked the way all false prophets do and say, well, he was ready to come, but people weren't ready to receive him. So he's going to wait a while. That's the way it is. And so it went. So he developed a cult following and this kind of a foundation that supposedly helped the poor around the world and whatever, but essentially he was another clown in the circus of the New Age,
Did you find his, like I did a show on Constance Cumby? I don't know if you remember the book.
Yeah, I know her. I've talked to her in the past.
Okay, because she said he had hypnotic power over the crowds or the groups that were there. Did you sense anything like that, or was he just?
I did see it, but you have to remember that a charismatic relationship is a relationship. It isn't a power that the guru has or that he had. So people already developed a relationship with Creme before they even came, most of them, before they came to one of his talks. And so I was observing, because I was an observer in his about 100 some people were there. about half the audience did get entranced with him. You could see it. They were in that kind of suggestible smiley face zone listening to him, where the other half were kind of like, and they kind of even walked out in the middle of the talk. So he didn't. So the charismatic relationship is a relationship. You have to be able to get people to project something onto you in order to get them entranced with you. The same person that can entrance a small crowd of people will cause a reaction in other people that walk away and say, that guy's a real asshole, and walk away. They never felt anything. They just think he's a buffoon or a fool of himself, or talking nonsense, and they don't feel any of that so-called hypnosis at all.
So it's like the suggestibility. The person's primed almost.
You got to participate in it. You got to either be highly suggestible, you got to be really into that stuff, or you have to allow your critical mind, the prefrontal cortex, to float. You don't filter. You just allow it to go into the emotions, and boom, you're one with the speaker. You're smiling, you're feeling everything, and
but I would say that's
crying,
kind of like the star celebrity
same thing
dynamic. Like that's what they want.
Same thing. Yeah. If you saw the movie Elvis and you watched how they portrayed the crowds, which was kind of real, that's what happened. Man, he really, especially the women, I mean, he had them going. They were in another world.
Or the Beatles too, like those
Beatles, same thing. Frank Sinatra used to do it to people, women especially. There were women that would go to Frank Sinatra concerts and throw their bras and panties up on stage. That's how much he could affect them. Yeah,
that's amazing. Joe, do you have time for a few questions?
Yeah, certainly.
Somebody asked, are there any seminars connected with this group, with the Course in Miracles? I think so.
You mean in terms of promoting it? I imagine there are. I don't keep up with it, so I don't know. But I imagine if you looked on Course in Miracles study groups, you'll find things online. Just put Course in Miracles study group into Google, and something will come up.
And then somebody asked, Sheila asked, could your guest speak about William Thetford's link to MK Ultra if possible? We talked about that in the pre-show.
Yeah, I read about it. I think you have to take a step back when you look at things like MK Ultra, and because I've read a lot about it. There's quite a few studies on it done, and it was really a setup to kind of compete with the Russians that were exploring psychic power. There was a book that came out, back in the late 60s, Psychic Discoveries Behind the Iron Curtain, or whatever. And the United States set up their own mind control experiments, especially during and after World War II. And MK Ultra came out of that. There was the whole idea of finding a truth serum. How could you get spies to spill out the truth? LSD was one of the drugs they were using, but they found it was kind of useless because people were tripping and connecting with God. They weren't telling the truth about anything, on LSD.
I heard they did all the studies to use the finest drug to get people to talk, and they ended up with alcohol. So they did all these studies and said,
right, and you end up with sleep deprivation and all of that. But what they found out was exactly what the Chinese found out. They could get people to talk openly, if they could convert them to Maoist thinking, to correct their false thinking. So they would try to get the person in these re-education camps in China over time to convert, like to the communist religion. So the CIA, for all its efforts with drugs and mind control and waterboarding and all that crap they were doing, if you could be nice to somebody and you could convert them to your religious way of life, whether it's constitutional America or whatever, you're more likely to get truth out of them. That was the ultimate end game of what they discovered after doing all of that, which is not that hard to understand. Just like in psychotherapy, if a psychotherapist can gain rapport over time with someone that's very paranoid and then get a trust bond going and get them to believe in the therapy and keep coming back, after a while, that person will begin to unload and start to heal in a way by letting the psychologist know that was their enemy to start with, now is their trusted friend. So this is what the Chinese communists would do in their education camps, whether they're with prisoners or with people that were they considered anti-communist, would try to convert them. It wouldn't work. Some of them would only pretend to convert because they got tired of the coercion, just to get them off their back, and to keep their job, because they didn't want to lose their job. And so that kind of quasi or fake conversion would go on all the time. But some people really did convert, and become true believers. Like this book I have, Perfect Soldiers, about the pilots that flew the planes in 9/11 into the thing. They were converted into Islam, and they were living in America for a couple of years among Americans like average people, exposed to everything we have here, being nice people. And yet inside their head, they were converted to the extent that they really didn't need somebody telling them what to do all the time. They were convinced of what they were going to do. And they went through that process to the point of killing people. So religious conversion is the most powerful form of mind control. So here's a question: what should one do when dealing with someone who drank the Kool-Aid and has brought the New Thought ideology? It's a good question. It's something I did for a living, which was family would call you in. You'd set up a meeting with the person somehow. Maybe they didn't want to talk initially, just like people don't want to talk to you when the family's trying to convince them to go to rehab. But you gain rapport with them, and you say, "Listen, I think you might want to hear what I have to say about the group you're in, or about this ideology you believe in, and let's talk for an hour." The hour could lead to 2 hours. It could lead to 3 hours, and usually, if it's successful, it usually takes about 30 hours or several days to get people to rethink a point of view or an allegiance to a group that has, if it's going to work. I mean, I've had people leave a cult they were deeply committed to, like within 4 hours. That's rare, but usually it took, if it's successful, it would take me days of work, 10-hour, 12-hour days of working with them and their family. It ain't easy, and you've got to be kind. You've got to gain their respect. You've got to listen to them, even if it's crazy for a while, to explain what they think. You've got to be able to explain what they think in their terms. In other words, if someone's in the Hare Krishna group, when I was talking to them, I had to be able to explain Hinduism to the family, much like the Hare Krishnas believed Hinduism, in order for the person to begin to trust me. So I've had some of my clients and say the Hare Krishnas wonder if I was Hindu because I understood their religion so well. So you have to go in very well prepared. If you're going to try to dissuade somebody from New Thought, you better know New Thought inside out. You better know how they believe and how they don't believe. You better know maybe 12 or 13 different groups that use New Thought. You've got to be on your game and not have to look things up on the internet in front of the person. When you're talking to them, you've got to have flow in your conversation. You've got to have some kind of confidence, and not only that, you've got to back up what you say because they're going to look it up later.
Right, good point.
You don't want to be caught to be a liar. That's one thing. Or mistaken. You're using somebody's fake information about New Thought, and you start repeating it like New Thought is of the devil. If you start using that kind of a Christian argument, you're going to lose your audience real quick.
Right. I don't think there's that much of that kind of there's evil spirits or demons or devils in New Thought. Would you agree with that?
No. But the criticism of New Thought, the criticism of that kind of religion from fundamentalist Christianity or fundamentalist Islam or fundamentalist anything is usually that it's demonically inspired or whatever. So you got to be careful with that line of criticism because there's really not a whole lot to support it. It might have flaws in it, but it doesn't mean there's demons dancing in it.
Right. Joe, we are at the 1 hour mark. Is there anything you'd like to add or anything I missed? I mean, it's great discussion. Your breadth of knowledge is amazing. People need to check out your YouTube channel. So I'll put a link to that.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I guess all I have to say is if people that are into this and you're worried about their behavior, like they're changing diet, they're changing friends, they're, whatever, they look like they're getting radicalized. the best thing to do is just stay in touch with them, maintain a friendship, allow them to talk about it, allow them to kind of recruit you, but just tell them, yeah, it's not for me. I'll look into it, and if I come up with something, in other words, you ask them permission questions. If I find something I don't quite understand, can I ask you about it? Or if I come across a criticism, can I run it by you and see what you think? So you ask a permission question before going into any critical territory. And if a person says, yeah, sure, I'm open, well, you've got, then you can walk in the house, you can walk around with them and explore the thing and come up with ways to help them to engage in, what I said to open this, that a way to battle against the bewitchment of their intelligence by means of their language, because a lot of us do get bewitched by the things we believe in.
Very true. And where can people find your book? It's Santa Fe, Bill Tate, and Me.
Amazon.com. If you just look on Amazon, it's sold through there. Just put my last name, Szmihart, Santa Fe, Bill Tate, and it's going to come up.
It'll pop up. It's SZIMHART. And if
Yeah.
people want to follow up with you or contact you, do you have an email or website or anything you'd like to?
Well, I have an email. I do answer emails as best I can. Just to let people know, if they're listening here, I'm full-time right now responsible for taking care of my mom with a little help from family and hospice. She's 99, so I don't know how that could go on for months. So I don't have a lot of time on my hands right now to be engaged with people that need a lot of help or want to engage in discourse. I can, answer a question and give them leads and books and whatever, and go from there.
Right. And so I'll put your email in the show notes. And I wish you the best. I hope everything.
Yeah. Listen, we've been going through this for quite a while. My mother's a very savvy person about her state, and she is ready to go. It's been there for a year. Yeah.
Wow. Well, I'm sorry to hear that. I wish you the best. And Joe, thanks so much for sharing your time.
Sure. Thank you.
Took time out of your busy
All right,
day.
Bill.
Thanks so much. Come back anytime. It's an
All
open
right,
invite.
good.
If you ever want to talk with anything, I'll try to find somebody to debate QAnon. I can't find it, but if I do find somebody to debate QAnon with you, you'll be the first person I'll email. So
I'll be nice.
Thanks so much.
All right.
Okay, I know you will.
Take care.
All right. Take care. Thanks so much.
Thank you.